Hey everybody, this is a quick video dealing with chapter 3 in Matthew, and it's dealing with one of the prophecies, the prophecy that's, at the end of chapter 2 in Matthew, not chapter 3, but it's at the very end of chapter 2 in Matthew. And for this specific prophecy, it's just a little bit different and a little bit complicated, and it tripped me up for a little bit. So if you want to just talk about prophecy in general, I'd encourage you to go back to my typology video on prophecy that was last week, and it'll kind of break down some different types of prophecy. But this one's a category all by itself. Main reason is we can't find the prophecy where this prophecy comes from. So this is in verse 23 of chapter 2 in Matthew, and it says, "Then he went and settled in a town called Nazareth to fulfill what was spoken through the prophets, that he would be called a Nazarene." Now, most prophecies, most things that follow a prophecy like this, you'll find it it'll be italicized or bolded in your scripture, and there'll be kind of a reference or a mark going back. And you can go and look up where this came from and say, okay, this is where the prophecy came from. This won't be in your scripture because we can't find where this came from. And it kind of makes things complicated. Most prophecies were like, oh, this came from Isaiah, this came from Jeremiah, this came from here, this came from Micah, but this one, it's not recorded. And so there's a lot of theories out there as to what it is. There's some extra biblical material that we're like, oh, well, maybe Jesus is quoting from this or quoting from that. But there's a couple of things, I think some indicators here that give us some hints as to what's going on. And then I'm just going to give you what I think is the best theory out there. The first little hint is that in this passage it says it's fulfilled what's spoken through the prophets, not the prophet, not prophet singular. If you look at the other prophecies going back to verses 23 or 22 and 23 of chapter 1, and the verse 15 of chapter 2, it says prophet, or verse 6 of chapter 2 as well, prophet. This is what was spoken by the prophet. This is what was written by the prophet, singular. And then this one, it says, this is what was spoken to the prophet. It doesn't say this is what was written, which is what it says in verse 5 of chapter 2. But instead it goes back to spoken, and it says prophets, plural. Okay, so there's multiple prophets out there that have been saying this, but they didn't write it down clearly. So this is an oral history of prophecy. This is an oral recording of prophecy. Most of the people in this time who heard this or read it from Matthew would be like, oh yeah, they were saying that. We knew that. We were talking about that, but it's an oral history. And when you think about it, so at this time in Judaism, not only did they have the Old Testament scriptures, but they also had oral traditions of prophecies that they learned and that they knew. And so this would have been an oral prophecy that had been passed on and that they knew. So that just throws a little bit of a wrench into it. But it's still clearly a prophecy. Matthew knew it and passed it on as a prophet, as a prophecy, and something that could be determined on. Now, what were they saying? They were saying that the Messiah would be a Nazarene. What they weren't saying he'd be from Nazareth. These prophets weren't saying that. It turns out that's what they meant without knowing it. What they were saying is he would be a Nazarite, or set apart from God. He would be somebody who didn't drink wine, that didn't cut his hair. All the Nazarite vows that are in the Old Testament, if you look up the Nazarite vows, it's a special vow that you take to be set apart from God, for God. And what he's saying is, this is a Nazarite. This is someone who, he's not going to go out and get married. He's not going to live a normal life. He's going to be set apart directly from God. But it turns out he is also going to be from Nazareth. So it kind of goes back to the whole typology idea, but this is an oral tradition that's not recorded anywhere else in Scripture, and it has to do not only with the fact that he was set apart, but also from where he is from.